Over the past couple of years that you've been outside of Russia, how has your opinion changed about the country as a whole and your sentiment towards, I don't know, cities versus rural areas? Because there is a huge difference there, right? Between the metropolitan centers of Moscow and St. Petersburg and Novosibirsk and...
Of course, Moscow is different from the rest of Russia. In Russia, we say Moscow is not Russia. Moscow is Moscow.
Do you recognize that Western shortcomings as well and how they've led to not necessarily just the war in Ukraine, but more broadly the non-existent relationship between Russia and the West?
I think that the West is far from perfect, and we gotta understand it's the United States, it's the UK, Australia, European countries, far from perfect. And one problem that is common for all of us as human beings is power. Some people desire power. They try to get power, possess it. And the West is not any different from Russia, from China, from any other countries.
This is The Global Gambit.
It's back for another episode, but this time we talk probably 90% of the channel on Russia and Ukraine. But often we're talking from Western perspectives, we're talking from the Ukrainian perspectives, and there's been one gentleman, one person I've been wanting to talk to for a long time, which is, he runs his own YouTube channel on Inside Russia. It's Konstantin. Now, if you're not familiar with Konstantin, he was born in Rostov-on-Don, and he has lived throughout Russia, but also Uzbekistan, where he currently is at the moment as a political activist, and also in the United States. So he has, I think, a very interesting blend of Western and non-Western, to be more encompassing, perspectives. And I'm delighted to be finally able to talk to Konstantin about his perspectives of the situation. Now, this is the first of what I hope to be many more conversations with Konstantin about his perspectives on Russia, Ukraine, but also sort of the world and the geopolitics, of course. But Konstantin, здравствуйте. Thank you for joining the show. Как дела?
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Let's try. This is our first conversation. I'm pretty sure it's going to be good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And before people start going, wow, Pyotr speaks Russian, that's about the extent to which my Russian goes, everyone. I wasn't born in Russia. I was born in Britain, but visited many times. And I think really, Konstantin, the first question that I want to ask you in this more personal chat is, how's it been living in Tashkent and observing what is going on, not just between Russia and Ukraine, but within Russia itself?
Pyotr, I don't really know where to start, really.
Maybe take us through. So when did you move to Uzbekistan? When did you flee? And maybe take us through.
Okay, I'll tell you the whole story then. First of all, I had never in my nightmares, I never allowed Russia going into war with Ukraine. I've been doing YouTube. I've been a YouTuber for a long time. And people were asking me in December of 2021, and January of 2022, in February, will Russia attack? As you remember, there were lots of rumors. And I was the first person to say never. Russia would never attack Ukraine. That's an insanity. That's not going to happen. Russia is not to benefit from attacking Ukraine. That's just, it's crazy. And Russia did attack, okay? And my world really changed on that day. Me and my wife, we decided to move out of Russia on that day, on February 24th. That was an easy decision, but it was really difficult to implement because you have to give up on your life and start new life somewhere else. Okay, that's very difficult. We have 3 kids, one little kid and 2 teenagers, and 1 adult now. And, they all go to school, and they all were going to school and kindergarten, and it's difficult. Very difficult, okay? So we were making preparations for quite some time, and what was the kick in the butt for me was the mobilization that I announced. Now, I feared that Russian government would use that as an excuse to mobilize me and basically get rid of me, because by the time they announced mobilization, I was already pretty well-known opponent of the war, and I made daily live streams out of Russia, being inside Russia against Putin, against the government, and against the war. So I was afraid that they're going to use that as an excuse to just silence me. And basically, I had made a decision to leave Russia, and I had 36 hours to leave. And it was very hard because how do you you have to end your life. You have to cut, all the ties with your country in 36 hours. How do you do that? Well, I certainly didn't have any experience in doing anything like that. So I moved to Uzbekistan because I worked and lived and worked here a long time ago, about 12 years ago. For a couple of years, I had an office here. So this is a place I know well. And I basically packed a couple bags and moved. And I burned bridges with Russia, in Russia. And, at first I thought my life was over here in Tashkent because how do I even explain? You end your life and you move somewhere and you don't know where you're going to live, what you're going to do, what happens to you next, what happens to your family. You don't know when you meet your children again and you see them. And it was very tough, not just for me, but for about 40,000 Russian refugees who moved along with me in those few days. There was an exodus from Russia. And bit by bit, we started picking ourselves up and, getting ourselves together. It's been over 2 years now. We're still alive. We're still breathing. Most of us have done well finding new direction, having new vision for our lives. Myself included, I've done quite a few things. I continue my YouTube channel. Daily, I tell people truth about what's happening in Russia, and I'm objective with things that are happening inside Russia. I have started a charity foundation in the United States helping Russians and Ukrainians move to the USA in a legal way and start their new lives there, to find a new home there. I have created a support group of Russian oppositioners, refugees here in Tashkent. We're over 1,000 people now. I'm in contact with different countries and cities with Russian refugees there. And basically, this is this is how I left, and this is what's become of it.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. I think it's very powerful, and I understand it's not exactly an easy thing to do. I'm not, shall we say, mincing my words and not going straight in with some tough questions. And I resonate a lot with what you said because it reminds me of conversations I've had with my own father about leaving a lot of things behind. His was for love, not for political asylum, fortunately. But I think one of the questions I have then, it's sort of two-parted, right? The first part is that you've got a little bit of a foundation, very small basis of familiarity with Uzbekistan. But Uzbekistan is still influenced by Russia, its sphere of influence. It's under its former orbit, of course. It's not perhaps as close as some of the other Stan states. Could you explain a little bit how you felt being in Uzbekistan and still being quite close to Russian influence? But as a part of that, what was the initial reaction to you being in Uzbekistan? Were people quite okay with it? Were people welcoming and sympathetic? Has there been moments of tension and animosity towards Russians entering Uzbekistan, be it from your own personal experience or what you've seen and heard?
In my mind, Uzbekistan is the safest and the best place for Russian refugees to come, to move to and live. It is a part of Central Asia and a part of the former USSR. Obviously it has ties with Russia, cultural, business ties. But out of all other countries that are part of the former USSR, Uzbekistan is the farthest one. Because it's always been conducting an independent policy. Kazakhstan is right next door, for example. But Kazakhstan is different. It's influenced by Russia. It's a part of the union that consists of Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. Таможенный Союз, the customs union with lots of rules and regulations that are shared. Three countries. it's much easier to extradite a person from Kazakhstan rather than from Uzbekistan, although it's possible. And Uzbek people are very loyal to Russians. The Russian is spoken here, at least in Tashkent, in the capital. And Uzbek people are generally nice. Their culture is very hospitable. When we came here, and it was, like I said, an exodus, we were just trying to get out of Russia. And not too many people knew of Uzbekistan when they were coming. We just needed somewhere to go, okay? And in a few days, 40,000 Russian men, same as me, middle-aged, educated, who just cut ties with Russia, found themselves being in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. And we didn't hear one bad word, one bad look. We didn't see one bad look towards us, okay? The locals were trying to help as much as they could. They fed us. They took us into their homes, some of us at least, who couldn't afford. They gave us shelter. They have been extremely nice. So Uzbekistan is an absolutely fantastic place. I love it. My son goes to a school in Uzbekistan. He learns Uzbek is third language. First is Russian, second English. Uzbek is third, He is soaking in Uzbek culture. He's in second grade. My teenage daughter also is going to Uzbek school, and my adult daughter went to study at the university in the USA. So Uzbekistan has become a big part of our life, and other Russians as well. I know, I have created a large community here out of Russians, and many families reunited, and they left Russia. The women and children left Russia and followed their husbands. So far, I have not heard of one accident based on Uzbeks disliking Russians. I have not heard one bad word. Unlike Kazakhstan, unfortunately, I've been to Kazakhstan a couple times, and the border from Kazakhstan is about 30 kilometers from here. It's very close. And I went to Kazakhstan a couple times. As soon as I crossed the border, people would come to me and say, "Hey, you're Russian. What are you doing in Kazakhstan? Just go back to Moscow, where you came from." I said, "I came from Uzbekistan." Well, it doesn't matter, So I had very hostile attitude towards me in southern Kazakhstan and Shymkent. Perhaps it's not the entire Kazakhstan, but that's my personal experience. Uzbekistan has been fantastic to me and to tens of thousands of other Russians.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As we were saying off air, I've been to Kazakhstan when I think it was the first place I ever went. I think I was like 7 months old, and we flew on Aeroflot and a couple of other airliners to Almaty and a couple of other places. But I've never been to Uzbekistan or Tajikistan or Turkmenistan. Fascinating places and part of the world. And I've got another YouTuber who we should definitely do a 3-way stream or something together, who's also based in Tashkent. And yeah, it's a fascinating.
Who's that?
Michael Rossi.
Who's the YouTuber?
So he's also a YouTuber. So we'll definitely get you on for a live stream or something between the two of you. I'll introduce you. Let's
do it.
Yeah, but there you go, guys. We got part 2 and 3 coming up already. But yeah, no, I think that leads me perfectly into my next question, which is a little bit more about your YouTube. Obviously, keeping within the realms of what we're talking about today, but like being a Russian who is willing to put themselves out there, you've been at risk of persecution. You're probably more of a face to people in the Kremlin or in Moscow because of your vocal criticism of the war and of the Kremlin, but also because you have a big following. You have several 100,000 subscribers on your channel. So could you? I'm very curious to hear, I guess, a bit more about your experiences of that. What's the perception amongst people? What's happened since you've moved from Russia, and the ability for you to get, YouTube, because YouTube's banned, I think now it's heavily restricted. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and then maybe we can explore some of the more recent developments.
Well, first of all, my audience is English speaking, and Russians don't watch me. And this was my decision to start YouTube channel in English, speaking English to English speaking audience, because At the time, 3 years before the war started, never thought of any war with Ukraine. It was just insanity. Okay, so back then I felt like a lot of people outside Russia misunderstood Russia. A lot of them misunderstood Russian people, Russian ways, Russian culture, and I knew both countries, both cultures, Russian culture and the Western culture, because I spent so many years in the United States. I have 2 kids living in Maine, and I was born and raised in Russia. So I decided to act as a bridge, so to speak, a cultural bridge, and that's what my channel was about. And I showed foreigners Russia as I loved it, as I saw it through my eyes, and then when the war started, everything changed. And I was not free in Russia. I couldn't talk freely. And a lot of supporters were advising, suggesting, threatening me, saying, Konstantin, get out of there. Just get out of there. But it took me about 6 months to leave Russia. My following has been growing because, people find interesting what I talk on my channel, and I'm proud of that. I have also been followed by Russian state. I have caught KGB operatives following me on 2 occasions. Okay, and until a certain point in time, they didn't care about me. I was too small of a influence, But now my audience is about 1/20th of what RT does in English, of RT's audience. But the thing is, RT has a team of a few thousand reporters and people, all kinds of people working in Russia and outside Russia. And they try to spread propaganda all over the world. And I counter that. I tell the truth. Okay, and people believe me because, I present facts about Russian life. And RT doesn't like that. Russian state doesn't like that. And they've started paying very close attention to me. And, that's certainly has changed in the recent months. Let's say I started noticing in March of this year, and that's what's been going on. More and more people watching me in the West and in Russia. I figured, I thought of reaching out to Russians. I do that, but not through YouTube, but through, having a large network of contacts in Russia, because I was born and raised and I spent 20 years working inside the country. So I do that differently. I reach out to Russians. And on YouTube, Russians have so many great resources. Well, they had until YouTube was shut down, So many great independent media. Дождь, можем объяснить, Medusa, the media like that. I don't even know how to call them. TV stations or radio stations, whatever. So, and then they have professional reporters, fantastic reporters, and Russians have access to all the news they can find and they want to find in Russian, okay, to good sources of news. They don't need me.
Are you sure? I think that
I am absolutely. They have, now in Russia, all you have to do is open your eyes and look around. Why do you need Konstantin to tell you what you can see around you? Okay, you can install VPN and still watch YouTube. You can go,
because I think it takes an independent party outside of the everyday to be able to have a fresh set of eyes and appreciate the changes or deterioration that's happening, right? Also, in the influencer economy,
Live. Go to Deutsche Welle, go to Dost, go to other sources like that.
Are you sure that they won't? But are you not worried that Russians themselves are going to be aware that if they're viewing such websites, then they themselves might be on a watch list? They might be being observed, and then they put themselves at risk.
No,
right?
No, if they install VPN, they're not on the list. They're not under threat. I'm pretty sure about that. And you know what? My experience that Russians I talk to, one of the biggest problems with Russians right now is they are living their lives in informational bubbles. They have built the bubbles for themselves, and they don't want to get outside the bubbles because when when you look outside, it's scary. You start asking questions of what's going on, and it becomes very painful. I know because I've been there, I've done that. I went through that process. It's been very painful for me for 2.5 years because I don't close my eyes. I open and I look what Russia is doing to Ukraine, and it hurts me. And it would be much more easier to close my eyes and ears and say, "Hey, that's it. I don't want to. I don't want to hear anything. I'm just living my life. I work. I make living, and that's it." And that's what most Russians are doing right now. So
Yeah,
I don't
that's
think
living in
they.
bliss, isn't it? That's living in ignorance, blissful ignorance, and the ostrich in the sand kind of analogy. But
I'm trying to reach out to Russian people on a personal level, not through YouTube, but on a personal level in Russian, to people who know me, who I know well, and there's no result. I don't just feel like they'll be watching my YouTube and changing their opinions. So that's my attitude towards Russian audience.
yeah, but do you not think that half of that is not down to Russians themselves, but down to the state having such absolute control of information sharing and access that rural Russians particularly wouldn't have any reason not to believe it? Because they have such absolute control. This is what Putin has done so well in the 25 years he's been president, right? He's been eradicating any forms of alternative thought. He's indoctrinated essentially a large proportion of the Russian electorate, particularly in rural areas, to look at him as the only person who can lead the country, right? The other thing being that Russians have who else to compare in a post-Soviet world? Yeltsin. So if you have Putin or Yeltsin, most Russians are going to pick Putin because at least he looks competent, he looks brave, he looks like he's standing up for Russian interests in the motherland, right? So do you not think it's a little bit more than just Russians don't want to deal with the difficult news, but they also don't have a deeper awareness, or they've been brainwashed?
About 20% of Russians, and this is my opinion. That's from I didn't learn it from. Well, there are different numbers out there. Let's put it this way. And I also rely on my opinion. I reach out to different Russians, my former colleagues, my distant family, my friends, former friends. People who are involved in YouTube and informational channels and so forth. I see that about 25% of Russians do not support what is going on. They do not support Putin. They do not support Russian government. About 75% or so, give or take, have full support of Putin. Okay, they are warmongers. They support what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Now, this question, how come 25% exist in Russia? How come Putin hasn't been able to brainwash them? How has it happened? Okay. I think that we all have our own heads, our own souls, our own hearts. And if we decide not to think critically, it's not Putin brainwashing us. That's our own problem. It's, issue of every single person. It's about me being brainwashed or not. How come they never brainwashed me? How come they never brainwashed my comrades who live here in Tashkent, who left everything behind and fled? Why? So we allow to be brainwashed, or we think critically. We use our brains. This is my stand. This is my position.
It's interesting because certainly there's a degree of that, but I still think that there is a spectrum, I suppose. I think there are people who are pro-Putin, but they might be anti-war, but they don't say anything against the war because then that might come off as being critical of Vladimir Putin, and so they then are reprimanded for that. There are people who, like yourself, as you say, are the 25% who are anti-everything as it stands. And then there are the people who are pro-everything. And I think it's just interesting to hear from you how you view the divergences of opinion and details because, for example, the Levada Center, which is a well-known research institution, would be quite good at trying to get information and reflect sort of just more, not more sort of, are you pro-war or anti-war, but sort of, are you pro trying to get Crimea back, but leaving the rest of Ukraine? They went to greater detail in terms of surveys and things like that. So over the past couple of years that you've been outside of Russia, how has your opinion changed about the country as a whole, and your sentiment towards, I don't know, cities versus rural areas? Because there is a huge difference there, right, between the metropolitan centers of Moscow and St. Petersburg and Novosibirsk and Yekaterinburg and stuff.
Well, before I answer that question, one of the top executives of Levada Center lives here in Tashkent and member of our community. So I know quite a bit of the company organization.
Wow. Okay.
And I'm on touch with that person, I would say, on most days of a week, every week.
Wow.
So we discuss things. Yes, and we disagree on some things. We agree on some things. So I definitely look at their data. I mean, I look at everything that is available in Russia. So, but I still stand on my position. Fair. Answering your question, of course, Moscow is different from the rest of Russia. In Russia, we say Moscow is not Russia. Moscow is Moscow. St. Petersburg is fairly close to Moscow. It's also very different from the rest of Russia. And that's, you've traveled to Moscow, right?
Yeah.
You've seen the difference. It's a striking difference, everywhere. It's infrastructure, the city services, salaries in Moscow and in the rest of Russia. It's availability of services. It's everything. Moscow it stands alone. Okay, St. Petersburg is pretty close too. I can't really make a huge difference between rural areas and big cities of Russia. Moscow and rural areas here, it's very different. But let's take Rostov and Rostov province. I think Rostov is 1 million. Well, I know 1 million people city, and Rostov province is also 1 million.
Right.
And people in Rostov province are not that different from Rostov. Okay. I've heard that opinion. Oh, rural areas in Russia so much, the people are so different there. They have different beliefs. Not really. I mean, in general, there are more free thinkers in big cities, but it's not just a huge drastic change.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, there's certainly a distinction, I think, between mega cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg versus small and medium-sized cities like Rostov or maybe Yekaterinburg or something. And yeah, I agree that, I mean, for the times that I've been to Moscow, it's incredible. But I think this is part of the problem of Russia. Its economic geography is incredibly disproportionate. It's incredibly lopsided, isn't it? And the lack of development in northern oblasts, I don't know, like a Chukotka or something, are bad. And you've got entire villages or settlements that have been abandoned in the Soviet periods, which were important for time, but then people have just left because the weather's, not exactly inhabitable. So going through all of this, though, you have different perspectives to some people who are more Western aligned as well, like your Levada Center acquaintance, right? But do you also recognize, because I think what I like to try and do on my channel is recognize the fallacies, the inconsistencies, the hypocrisies of Western policy? Because if we don't, then we're not ever going to make any progress and avoid, hopefully, what's been happening right now in the future. Do you recognize that Western shortcomings as well, and how they've led to not necessarily just the war in Ukraine, but more broadly the non-existent relationship between Russia and the West?
I do. I think that the West is far from perfect. And speaking of the West, we got to understand it's the United States, it's the UK, Australia, European countries, Italy, France, Germany, Spain, far from perfect, have their own problems. And one problem that is common for all of us as human beings is power. Some people desire power, and they try to get power, possess it. And the West is not any different from Russia, from China, from any other countries. The big difference between the West and the rest of the world is there is a better system of checks and balances, and that's it. That has allowed the West to advance so much, to have democracy, to just to be at the head of the world. But yes, there are problems, of course. I realize that.
All right. So my last question is a little cheeky one in that a few years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. I was living there, working in international relations and economic policy. And we went to an event, a friend and I, and there was a well-known academic called John Mearsheimer, who I'm sure you've heard mentioned in your conversations with people. And he's become even more popular and world-renowned in the past 2 years because of his perspective on Russia and Ukraine and the West, which is that he blames the West, not entirely, but predominantly for what happened with first the annexation of Crimea, but also now February 2022. And I asked him a question at this event, and I was basically asking him, what would it take for the West and Russia, or specifically the US and Russia, to become better friends again, or at least better partners, maybe not even allies, right? And he's a realist, and he basically said the one thing, the rise of China, which I was expecting. But that question I put to you, but also with the addition of, I always naively believe that Russia could be a bridge. You mentioned the word bridge, right? You want to be a bridge between Russian viewers or understanding of the West and Western of Russia. I always hoped that Russia could be a bridge between sort of East and the West, right? Because it's such a big country. It's got ethnic, cultural, and social aspects of each, or many different things. Is that ever going to be possible, do you think? Or not until Putin's out of the picture?
First of all, Russia was on the way to become a bridge in the 90s. I lived in the 90s in Russia, and I remember quite well. When the USSR fell apart, there was an incredible movement towards West, and the West was recognized as something good. And we all of a sudden realized that the USSR, the country that they were selling us as a pillar of goodness, in the world, was a lie. And it was really the empire of evil. Okay. And I remember how popular the West was in Russia, in like day-to-day culture. Okay. Everything good came from the West. And Russia was becoming a part of the West, or at least moving towards that direction. And I remember a huge step in my mind was International Space Station. And it was just an incredible showcase of what we could do working together, united. It was a very good moment. But then, if you remember, first years of Vladimir Putin, he wanted Russia to become a part of NATO. And he was also very pro-Western. He was also moving towards the West. He wanted to be accepted. He wanted to be equal. He wanted to be included. The thing is, you have to prove yourself to be included. You have to grow to a certain level. They can't just take you there because you want to. Okay, you have to show the world that now you're worthy. Okay, and Putin couldn't do that, and it started deteriorating. He took a different direction, and he started building the vertical of power. That happened in 2004. I clearly remember in September 2004. And it has led us to this: the war in Ukraine, Russian society on the leash, human rights stripped, countries totalitarian again. That step was definitely to a wrong direction. Now, can Russia be the friend of the United States? That's the question I always answered, because both countries would benefit so much from being friends. And yes, China, I totally agree. China is the threat to both the United States and Russia, and then more to Russia. I mean, look what's happening to Russia now. It's under complete, not control, but influence from China, okay? And China is stepping more and more into Russia's resources, and that's making China stronger and stronger, okay? And the United States would benefit so much more having Russia as a friend and a partner, okay? And Putin just destroyed it, I guess. I don't think it's possible to make the friendship back with the USA when Vladimir Putin is at the helm of the country, when he's the czar. I think it's possible in the future. I mean, anything is possible, right? And it just depends on what turn Russia takes after Putin is gone. That is the key moment in history. What happens? Will Putin be succeeded by Putin number 2, one of his minions? What the policy of that man will be? Perhaps the elites will take over, and someone who succeeds Putin will be part of the elites who are looking towards the West, and in their interest is to create a partnership, to rebuild a partnership with the West. So it depends. It is possible, but with Putin as the president of Russia, I hardly doubt it.
No,
especially now since he used the ballistic missile in Ukraine 2 days ago. I mean, no.
Yeah, no, not for a long time. But Konstantin, we'll leave it there. I think for this first session, it's been very personable, and as I said, I've been looking forward to having this chat with you for a long, long time. Are there any parting thoughts you'd like to leave before we hopefully reconvene for that 3-way chat?
Let's have another conversation. Before we end this conversation today, I'd like to add, if we're talking on a personal note, I'm very angry at Russia and Russian people now. I feel I have been betrayed. I've been chewed up and spat out of the country, and I feel like the country is still going after me, even I am outside of the country. So please forgive me my bitterness towards Russia.
No,
so perhaps that will pass. I don't know, but that's how I'm feeling now.
No, it's I completely appreciate that. I've had very, tough conversations with my own immediate family. As I said, I'm being half English and half Russian. It's sort of, you want to be proud of your heritage or your personal background, but it's also very difficult to know how to feel about a country which is, again, I like to try and draw a distinction between the leadership and the people, but there are many people who do support the leaderships, and I fully understand how you feel or why you do. But I'm glad we had this conversation today, and I look very much forward to the next one where we talk maybe with my other friend in Tashkent, or we talk about some of the recent developments, which I think would be good sooner rather than later. Thank you very much, Konstantin.
Excellent.
And
thank you.
Thank you very much,
pleasure.
everyone. Do check out Konstantin's channel if you haven't already. And if you enjoyed this conversation, then give it a like and subscribe. And, I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.